Hi guys, and I thought I'd do another EV update. I thought it's about time to do an EV update, but it's easier said than done because there is just so much going on right now in the world at large, but also particularly in the automotive industry, that it's quite hard to keep up with the shenanigans, A, of what's happening, and B, the implications of what that all means. But I'll try and do my best. The only thing is, like, by the time you see this, this might be out of date already. But anyway, what's been happening, and of course, ideally, you need to watch the news to see what's going on in the world. But one of the things you will have seen in the news is that U.S. President Trump likes to talk about tariffs a lot, and he likes to just throw them around and then introduce them or not introduce them or whatever. And of course, that is ultimately causing a lot of, well, instability really in the market. He just announced plans to impose 25% tariff on, this is in addition to the other ones that he's recently, and I covered that previously as well. This is in addition to the other stuff. This is just now, I think just in the last few days. He announced a 25% tariff on imported automobiles and also pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. Semiconductors also would affect the automotive industry as well. If you remember, actually, post-COVID, that's why there was a huge delay in deliveries of lots of new cars because they just didn't have the semiconductors, the computer chips that are needed. There's sometimes as many as 3,000 of these in a car, in a brand new car. So you really need them. And I think in America at one point, they were actually issuing cars without the full options equipped in the car, and then saying, once we've got them, once we've got the chips, come back and then we'll upgrade your car to have all the full options. So this is the sort of stuff that was going on. So that's why, like, semiconductors are also a very important part of the car industry. Now, the reason that he's doing this, he says, because it addresses perceived trade imbalances, particularly with the European Union, which itself, to be fair, currently levies a 10% duty on US vehicle imports. So he's saying that this is trying to protect the domestic, i.e. the US car industry, and encourage investment within the US itself. However, of course, you've got to look at what the implications, the long-term implications of these things are, and it creates a huge amount of uncertainty for an industry that actually normally relies on very long-term planning. The car industry, with, like I've said before, the car production life cycles could be 3, 5, 7 years. So they are doing very, very long-term planning on their investments, on plants, on production facilities, on development and R&D, on testing, putting test miles on cars, etc., etc., and getting those cars ready for the market. So the car industry is already navigating this transition, and now has to cope with that as well. By transition, I mean the transition from internal combustion engine, ICE, petrol and diesel, to EV, electrification, and then now there's all this uncertainty. Now, going back to the electrification thing, of course, if you think about it, the fundamental reason why you could argue that he's doing this is because obviously the new emerging dominance of China in the auto industry, particularly in the EV industry. But having said that, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I'll explain it again later on, I reckon that actually what's happening could benefit the Chinese car industry. So let's get into all of that right after this. A brown car guy. Brown car guy. Right, so firstly, it's fair to say, or should be said actually, that despite everything that I've just said and everything that's going on, the EV market is still continuing to actually gain momentum. So that's still happening. So there's research from Row Motion forecasts global sales of fully electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles will exceed 20 million units in 2025, which is a 17% increase from the previous year. And this, of course, is buoyed or encouraged by, of course, the support that it gets, from China, but also from Europe. China is extending its auto trade subsidies, auto trade-in subsidies, apparently. And Europe, of course, as we know, is implementing stringent CO2 emissions targets, and of course, the things like the ZEV mandate and stuff that we even have here in the UK, which says that all new cars sold by 2030 should be electrified. Now, in America, of course, there's already been, with the EVs in particular, there's already been the fact that Trump has rolled back the subsidies there, the incentive, the $7,500 tax credit has been rolled back. He's also, I think, abandoned plans to amp up the charging infrastructure. So that's really causing a lot of problems there, and it's really dampening the EV adoption rate in that country. And also car companies are a little bit all over the place. General Motors is striving to reduce costs and remain competitive without having to ask for government aid. And don't forget, General Motors was one of the first of the American big car companies to jump into EVs headfirst with like the Chevrolet Bolt, you know, the little one. It's the first car actually, first EV that I actually drove properly. So and they were talking about transitioning very quickly and very fast, and they did a lot of stuff with obviously the previous president Joe Biden as well to showcase their electric cars. And now they're like, oh, okay, we'll have to rethink everything now. Kurt Kelty, GM's battery experts, emphasized the need for a sustainable business model independent of incentives to cut into the existing EV market share and to create affordable models with the advanced battery technology that they're working on. And of course, battery technology is advancing, and there are other things that are coming in the pipeline, such as solid-state batteries and other chemical compositions of batteries, which will make them longer, better, safer, and quicker to charge. Now, obviously, the Chinese car companies are seizing these opportunities as the legacy car companies are sort of floundering and not sure what to do, and their long-term plans are stalling. Chinese car companies are obviously heavily moving in. BYD, for example, has overtaken Tesla as the world's biggest maker of electrified cars. And of course, at the end of last year, we found out that 70% of the world's electric vehicles were actually coming from China. Oh, hey, are you liking this video? Then make sure that you hit the like button, make sure that you share, and make sure that you subscribe. Now, obviously, what's happening is that with the increased tariffs, say, on things like semiconductors, steel is another one that's now come into the mix, and of course cars need steel, and as well as they need semiconductors, and then of course the 25% tariff that apparently on April the 2nd is going to kick in for car companies trying to export to America. You look at a lot of the legacy car manufacturers in Europe, for example, a huge percentage of what they do actually is exported to America. So for example, 13% of Germany's car exports are to America. And of course, Britain exports a significant proportion of the cars that are assembled here. But all of this is actually going to cause the issue of, if these car companies, legacy car companies, are finding that their market is dissipating because they can't get into the American market because the cars have become too expensive there because of tariffs, then they either have to then reduce their infrastructure, their production dramatically, which means cutting jobs, cutting investment, bad for European economy, or they have to increase the prices of their cars to the markets that are taking them, which means us. So the trouble is that A, there will be just less of these legacy car manufacturers, or B, they'll just be hideously expensive. And that's the sort of thing that ultimately will then help the Chinese. And just to come back to what's happening in the EV world and how it's impacting manufacturers, some of the things, for example, that are coming out. Ford has paused production of the F-150 Lightning, I believe, and that's been delayed yet again. GM has revising targets of its 400,000 EVs per year by this year, I think. I think they're revising that target. Volkswagen is cutting production at one of its plants in Germany for EVs. Jaguar, which of course went on a hiatus, and we thought maybe we'll see them come back in 2025 with a new EV. Now it's looking like 2026, if at all. Even Tesla is known to be struggling. There's another company called Nikola Corporation, and they were going to become the big name in hydrogen electric trucks, lorries, that sort of vehicles. They've just filed for bankruptcy, so they're gone. So, this is causing a major upheaval everywhere. Now, like I said, the trouble is that there is still a demand for EVs, in the sense that people still understand that, we kind of need them. I mean, as a petrol head myself, I'm obviously always torn on this thing because, give me a good V8 any day. But at the same time, I recognize and understand the fact that, we've got to have a better balance in our fuel mix for our mobility going forward. And I've always said that EVs are not for everybody, but certainly like in towns and in cities, both in terms of the environmental impact and in terms of pollutions within cities, EVs do make a lot of sense. And actually they produce decent mileage as well in the stop-go environment of a city. So, there is good cause and good reason to have EVs. And I think that going forward, the best way of approaching our mobility needs in the future is to have a healthy mix of different fuels that suit people's lifestyles, their needs, their requirements, and where they live and where they drive. So for example, if you're in a city and you regularly drive through traffic and you're able to charge at home, then an EV makes perfect sense. If you live way out in the rural highlands of Scotland, somewhere like that, where you barely get enough electricity to turn your TV on, then an EV is not really going to suit your needs at this moment. So, hey guys, I've been writing. You see my 2 books there. They're now about to be joined by a 3rd book coming out on the 1st of March. Check it out. Here it is. So go down to Amazon, check out my account, BC Guy on Amazon, and why not treat yourself to one of my books at this moment. So, we need to be realistic and pragmatic about it. But what's happening here is that this so-called signaled rollback on EVs that appears to be, transcending globally is not very good for the industry itself, which is in complete flux and confusion because it needs to know how it needs to invest for 7 years, 10 years hence, not knee-jerk reaction to presidential edicts today, but what's going to happen 7, 10 years in the future is what they need to be thinking about. And we're not allowing them to do that because we're not settling things down, or rather the governments and legislators are not settling things down. So they can't really plan for the future, which if they can't plan for the future, like I said, as I've said before, is ultimately disastrous for them and could lead to them dramatically reducing the footprint of what they do or completely imploding and disappearing altogether. And that's looking very, very likely in a lot of these big manufacturers. And then the other part of this is, of course, if you have a situation where some parts of the car industry have gone, oh, okay, yeah, we're just going to go back to ICE, and other parts like China and maybe the Japanese and Koreans definitely, and maybe some other European companies are racing, and even startups in the Middle East, and racing ahead towards EV, and then EV becomes a bigger rate or bigger demand for EVs in the future, then those companies that haven't invested in it will be left behind, and again, will be subject to implosion and closure and all the rest of it. At the end of the day, we do need to keep the environmental stakes in mind. We are seeing the climate change impacts becoming increasingly severe, and so we do need to think about ways of reducing carbon footprints and what have you. Now, EVs are not always the answer, because I've said this before. I've said this in my content before, that we need to look at how the content for EVs is sourced, how it is mined, how it is produced, how it is put together, and then how those cars are delivered, and transported around the world. So actually, in a race to convert everything to EV, we're actually producing a greater carbon footprint. But I've always said that a slow, natural, organic transition to new fuel cars, which by that time will also be matured and technologically advanced enough to meet the needs and requirements and wishes of the users, makes perfect sense. And I think that should continue. But this back and forth, this like, oh, we're going down this way. No, we're going down this way. This is not helping anyone. This is the way that we should be doing this, is sort of going, let's go down this middle route together. Let's bring the V8s and the V12s and the petrol cars, but then also let's look at the electrified technology, the hybrid, the plug-ins in particular, which I think are always going to be the best intermediate middle solution. Then, if we don't do that, then we are signaling a very potential nightmare situation for the car industry as we know and love it. So I think that even for petrol heads, this is time for not celebration, but cautious concern about where we're actually heading with that. And honestly, the reality is that, you could say that these presidential edicts and decisions are just bluster and negotiation tactics and stuff like that. And maybe that's the case, which is fine. But nonetheless, it leaves car makers, car companies in massive confusion. And that's just not going to be healthy for the industry, for the economy, for people that work within them, for people that report them. So anyway, I will try and keep on top of this. At the moment, it's very hard to know where everything is going, but I'll keep trying to analyze and bring you whatever I can in terms of the current information and where we're going forward as often and as well as I can. Catch you all in the next one. Make sure that you like, share and subscribe, and I'm sure that I'll hear your opinions on this in the comments below. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links, or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.